Quick question. If you could ask one question and be guaranteed the absolute, undeniable answer, what would you ask? Let me know your answer in the comments below. Anyway, on to the video. The story begins with the villain's inner monologue. He cries out to his parents, sharing all the shit he's been through. About a year ago, when he was living his best life, Truck Kun came out of nowhere and hit him with that isekai DLC. At first, he had no idea what was going on, so he bawled his eyes out. However, after seeing the maidens of that world and realizing there was a chance to not only get bitches but also return to Earth, he decided to lock in. He dived headfirst into grueling battles, doing whatever it took to make it out alive. He also worked on his bitchy nature, doing his best to learn courage and comradeship, traits he undoubtedly lacked as a regular teen from Earth. He understands that some of the things he's saying might sound like nonsense to them, but he hopes they believe him when he says he's gotten stronger, strong enough not only to one-shot Minotaur cheeks, but also to cultivate genuine relationships. Relationships with allies who wouldn't hesitate to die for him should the need arise. Allies who would offer up the cakes should he wish to partake. Of course, it wasn't easy, and he's lost count of the number of times he's fallen, the number of allies he's lost. But he can confidently say he's pulled through more than he's stumbled. And even as he yaps this monologue, he is preparing to rise up again, and hopefully, this will be the last time. After today, he'll finally be done with this shit and make it back to Earth. Back to them. Done with his monologue, or maybe letter. The hero and soon-to-be villain rises to face his last foe. He takes one last look at his trusted comrades before decisively walking into the boss's room, the Demon King's room. As he does, he sends one last cry out to his parents. He begs them to pray for him. Pray that he can defeat the Demon King and return to them. Pray that he can forget all the shit he's been through ever since he came to this world. And most importantly, pray that the Saintess will be too tipsy to make good decisions tonight, because he indeed needed them cheeks. Anyway, the Demon King is waiting, so he should probably get going. This is a goodbye for now from their son, who misses his family and friends dearly, their one and only son, Kim Minsu. After ending his cry, monologue, or maybe letter, I don't know anymore, Minsu proceeds to blitz through the Demon King. He yeets him so fast the scene switches to celebrations at the kingdom. The atmosphere is predictably festive, with the citizens celebrating the Demon King's death. The same is true for the heroes' party, who are having a ball in the palace. Unfortunately, the Saintess isn't drinking as much as he'd hoped, so the Cheek's forecast isn't looking great tonight. However, he'll still be returning to Earth soon, so at least there's that. Realizing he'll truly be leaving soon, Minsu lets out a tired sigh. After all the shit he's been through, he'd honestly never imagined that such a day would come. The Saintess chimes in, saying she's happy for him. For what it's worth, if she forgets all the times he cried like a bitch, she can genuinely say he'd done a great job. Receiving the validation, Minsu immediately starts sobbing. He knew this would make him seem like a crybaby in front of the Saintess, but god damn it, he missed his friends and family. He couldn't wait to be done with this crap and head home, especially now that he realized he'd be leaving this world a tragic virgin. The rest of the party tries to get him to stay, but the Saintess quickly shuts them down. She reminds them just how much Minsu misses his home, so asking him to stay would be too cruel. She rallies the others in bidding Minsu goodbye. Just as he'd been a hero and brought good fortune to their world, she hopes his future will be fortunate as well. The squad chimes in, yelling that it's only natural, since he's the hero, it's inevitable that his future will be blessed and gracious. 3 weeks later, and their bullshit couldn't have been more wrong. Minsu, the former hero, is nothing but a shell of a man. Despair doesn't even begin to describe the pain he's feeling. When he hurried home, what greeted him wasn't the loving face of his parents, but a complete stranger. Turns out, his mother had been killed in a hit-and-run accident. The worst part? She died while handing out flyers, still searching for him. Even with her last breath, she insisted that her son would never have run away from home. After her death, his father couldn't handle the sorrow and took his own life. He blamed himself for everything, believing it was his fault for failing to protect his family. As if that weren't enough, the hits just kept coming. He was expelled from school, and even the teachers rebuked him, calling him a good-for-nothing son, a stain on his parents' legacy. To make matters worse, his friends wanted nothing to do with him. They all abandoned him, offering bullshit excuses like their parents had forbidden them from speaking to him. Just like that, he became that guy. The uncle who didn't fit in anywhere and had his life in shambles. Yeah, it was probably best to keep their kids away from that guy. When everything failed, he hoped he'd get some comfort from his relatives. However, all he got in return was a beating. They beat the shit out of him, blaming him for everything that happened. Because of him, their kin were dead, and the family had gone bankrupt trying to find him. He was cast away, told never to return, even after death. And so there he was, homeless, broke, abandoned, and most importantly, broken and without bitches. He had nothing to his name, and the bottomless pit in his heart grew larger. The more he thought about it, the more harrowing the despair became. Why was a hero who saved the world suffering so much? Why did it feel like everything and everyone had deserted him once he'd outlived his usefulness? How was any of this fair? He sank deeper into darkness and despair, wandering the city like a ghost. Eventually, he lost track of his surroundings and bumped into a man. The dude wasn't having that shit and started bullying him, mostly to show off for his girl, who was laughing her ass off at the spectacle. They called him a loser, the kind so pathetic he wasn't even worth picking on. Hearing the taunts, something in Minsu finally snapped. He flicked his dead eyes toward the bullies and asked why they weren't sad. If he had saved the world and still felt this broken, why couldn't they feel the same? With those words, his last shred of humanity vanished, replaced by a new purpose. He wanted everyone to feel what he felt. Utter despair. The man lost it too and grabbed him by the hair. He'd already been mumbling a bunch of bullshit. Did he want his mouth torn open? Minsu ignored him and called forth his sword, the sword of Durant. Just as the maiden was laughing at him for being cringe and too deep in his fantasies, a sword shot down and blitzed the absolute shit out of the bully. His blood gushed like a fountain, drenching the wench, her laughter dying in her throat. When she finally processed what the hell had just happened, overwhelming terror slammed into her, and she screamed her lungs out. Minsu, however, ignored the bitch and donned his armor. He told her to scream louder. She had to feel the same pain he was feeling. With that, he raised his sword and unleashed a slash that tore through the entire city center. It started off relatively large but quickly bloomed into a full-on fucking nuclear explosion. The explosion was so catastrophic, the entire country felt the aftershock. When it was all said and done, only one man stood in the middle of the wreckage. The hero who had saved the world, the hero who wanted everyone to feel his pain, and finally, the villain who had single-handedly wiped out an entire city, Kim motherfucking Minsu. We get a mini time skip to 3 weeks later. In the outskirts of Gyeonggi province, a stream of vehicles is frantically fleeing the capital. In one of those vehicles, we're introduced to the next major character in our tragic tale, the homie Park Jeongsu. Just like the villain, he's got his own monologue rocking in the background. He says that everyone, at some point in their lives, has thought about the world ending. It might be because of nuclear war, a natural disaster, or even a zombie apocalypse. However, no one ever really considers that it could end because of a... Before he could finish, his mother told him to cut out that monologue bullshit and lock in. Who did he think he was? Deadpool? Upset and low-key embarrassed, Jeongsu flicked his gaze toward his sister, who was bawling her eyes out. She was upset that they couldn't evacuate with their father, who had unfortunately been held back due to some reasons. Being a good brother and finding himself idle after his monologue was so rudely interrupted, Jeongsu focused on cheering up his sister. He told her not to worry. Their father would definitely rendezvous with them in Busan. However, until then, she should try to keep her tears to herself. Their mother was already a terrible driver. Who knows what shit show would happen if she got distracted by her crying. Just as he was about to throw more shade at the woman who killed his monologue vibe, a motorbike rushed by, shutting down the entire freeway. Following the halt was a policeman's panicked voice, announcing that the hero was closing in on them. He instructed everyone to abandon their vehicles and flee on foot. Otherwise, no one would be able to escape alive. The citizens heard hero and death and said say no more. They quickly abandoned their vehicles, fleeing frantically on foot. Just as the officer was about to warn them to slow down, a tank came flying in, crashing the shit out of him. This sudden change caught everyone off guard, and the entire place erupted into chaos. The citizens ran around like headless chickens, trampling anything that dared to get in their way. Amid the carnage, the Park family also fled, forcing their way through the chaos in a desperate bid to survive. At first, things were going smoothly, but soon the younger sister, Dabin, began to fall behind, forcing Jeongsu to carry her, further slowing their escape. Meanwhile, the hero was on the move, swiftly closing the distance on the fleeing civilians, leaving a trail of death and mangled corpses in his wake. Watching the civilians flee so pathetically, Minsu sneered in disgust. The very idea that they still clung to hope of escaping, was revolting to him. Did they really think they could survive while everyone else was dying? Did they truly believe they deserved to live, to love, and to enjoy life while he was out here in the drought, without a single coin or bitch to his name? Nah, fuck all that. He was going to kill them all. As he went on a rampage, the scene shifted to Jeongsu and his sister. Predictably, the young Chad was sweating bullets as he weaved through the crowd in a frantic escape. His breathing was already labored, but he grit his teeth and pushed on. Unfortunately, there's always that one asshole in the apocalypse, and in this case, it was the bastard who bumped into Jeongsu and knocked the bear out of Dabin's arms. It was quickly trampled and kicked under a vehicle. Seeing this, Dabin immediately yanked Jeongsu's hair. The sudden jolt scared the shit out of him. For a second, he thought the hero had caught up to him, or worse, that Diddy was coming in for seconds. Luckily, it was neither, and all he had to deal with were his sister's tantrums. He told her to forget about it, that they could always get her a new toy. But Dabin insisted this one was special. It had been a gift from their father, the last one he gave her before he left. So Jeongsu had no choice. He had to retrieve it. He sighed in annoyance, but in the end, his love for his sister won out. He sat her on top of a vehicle and told her to keep an eye on their mom and the path she took. Then, without wasting another second, he backtracked to find the toy. It was a hustle, but fortunately, no one was dumb enough to get in his way while fleeing for their lives. Eventually, he spotted the teddy and reached for it, just as the hero descended upon them, sword raised and ready to strike. With a single slash, he tore through the area, butchering everything and anything in his path. Blood flowed like rivers, and the entire cityscape erupted into a doomsday-like hell. When he finally came to, Jeongsu couldn't process what the hell he was seeing. The entire area had transformed into a nightmarish abyss, littered with corpses and heavy with the stench of charred flesh. His gut dropped in an instant. Where was Dabin? His mother? His grandmother? Panic took over as he rushed forward in a frenzy, desperately searching for them in the midst of the hellish ruin. Then, to his horror, he stepped on something, his sister's bloody arm. The sight made him freeze. Heart pounding, he frantically shoved aside the rubble, trying to reach her. But all that remained was the severed arm, and a mangled mess of flesh and blood. Jeongsu cried out in despair, struggling to suppress the nausea rising in his throat. He collapsed to his knees, trembling as the reality of losing his entire family sank in. Behind him, soft and deliberate footsteps approached. Minsu, drawn in by the lifeless look in Jeongsu's eyes. The Chad didn't hold back. He complimented Jeongsu directly. He liked the look in his eyes that spoke of true loss, true despair. Eyes just like his, devoid of hope, love, and of course, bitches. Jeongsu ignored the last part and demanded furiously, why had he done this? Minsu met his glare and replied calmly, because he could. What other reason did he need? The nonchalant tone pushed Jeongsu over the edge. He snapped, grabbed a metal rod, and charged forward, swinging, driven by a raw hunger for vengeance. Unfortunately, his MC power-up was still on cooldown. Minsu choked his shit. Pause, grabbing him by the neck. Wearing a villainous grin, he taunted Jeongsu, asking what he thought he was doing. Did he want revenge? With skills that pathetic? Before Jeongsu could react, he hurled him into the air and drove his colossal sword straight through him. Pause. The attack knocked the wind out of Jeongsu, leaving him dangling helplessly, bleeding out on the sword. As his vision darkened, for some reason, he decided to continue his inner monologue. He reflected on how most people imagine the end of the world, but no one ever thinks their world will end because of a hero. He apologized to his sister, Dabin, his mother, his father, and finally his grandmother for failing to avenge them. He also apologized to his potential hus for dying too soon, before they ever had the chance to meet. And so, on that day, Jeongsu died, having lost everything to the hero: his family, his life, and most importantly, his future hus. But fate wasn't done with the homie just yet. As he closed his eyes, he suddenly awoke to a maiden calling his name. Turns out, he'd been hit with the Isekai DLC, reincarnated in a new world as a hero, the very thing he'd come to despise. Following the massacre in Gyeonggi province, we get another time skip, this time to 1 year later. During that period, the hero had continued his rampage, and eventually, the government fell. Unfortunately, the collapse of the government wasn't the only crisis the civilians had to endure. Several individuals, just like the villain Minsu, began appearing and joined his tyrannical regime. They divided up the land of South Korea, each ruling and lording over their own domain. Everyone except Minsu, who was already overcompensating with his colossal sword. This part of the story shifts us to Jeju Island, the domain of the golem hero. In one of the warehouses, manned by a drone that looks suspiciously like a wrinkled nutsack, we're introduced to the vixen of the story. However, at the moment, the vixen isn't vixening. She's visibly sullen, mumbling about how she wants to die. Beside her lay a friend who rebukes her, warning her to cut it out with the jinxing nonsense. Did she want all of them to die? Clearly unbothered, the vixen replies that death would be more merciful than the hell they called living. The response stuns her friend, who immediately starts bawling. She reminds the vixen why they fled there in the first place. They wanted to live. But the vixen replies that that wasn't living. If she'd known things would get this bad, she would have ended it all back in Seoul. As the somber atmosphere settles around them, the door suddenly swings open, and in walks Thing from the Addams family. The monstrosity quickly rounds them up, herding them outside like a flock of sheep. Soon, under the guidance of several more things, the scattered groups are combined and lined up like prisoners in a labor camp. When everyone was finally assembled, the ruler of the domain, and the new villain of the story, made his grand entrance. He scaled the crouched hands that obediently lowered themselves into makeshift stairs. Upon reaching the raised platform, the hero accepted their killer salute with a cocky grin aimed at his terrified subjects. Wasting no time, he flexed his power, snapping his fingers and conjuring a speaker golem out of mere sand. Satisfied with the display, he launched into his cheerful speech. However, halfway through his bullshit, he noticed the listless expressions on the crowd's faces and frowned deeply. Why did they have that dead look in their eyes? Did they hate working that much? Or worse, did they hate him? The thought struck him as absurd. In his opinion, he was a benevolent lord. If they'd been under the rule of the vampire hero or the hero of faith, their fates would have been worse than death. They could have been drained of blood, or worse, brainwashed into one of those fanatical religious heretics. He genuinely considered them lucky, but clearly, that sentiment wasn't shared by the subject who kept staring up at him with that same damn listless gaze. Enraged, the hero began cackling darkly. He glared at the subjects, pests who'd clearly forgotten their place. Seemed like he'd been too lenient with them. Well, it was time to correct that. Noticing the hero's raised hand, the crowd broke into a panic. They frantically scurried to escape, each one concerned only with their own life. But it was too late. With a casual flick of his finger, the hands unleashed a gale of destruction that mercilessly tore through the civilians. Their anguished moans died in their throats as their bodies collapsed to the ground, lifeless. Unfortunately, one of the casualties ended up being the vixen's friend, who literally died choking on her own blood. She'd tried to call out to the vixen, but the maiden hadn't started her redemption arc yet, so she nonchalantly ignored her. Up on the platform, the hero kept going, flicking his fingers a few more times, decimating civilians with every snap. When things finally calmed down, the survivors made their way to the farm, their place of labor for the day. Among them was the vixen, still wearing that same sullen, unbothered look, as if her friend hadn't just died seconds ago. As she busied herself with her work, an old lady came forward and filled up her basket. She told the vixen to take a walk. She looked like shit and clearly needed one. The maiden expressed her gratitude, picked up a tangerine, and prepared to leave. Before she did, the old lady reminded her to be wary of the nutsack drones in the sky. Those little bastards spied on everything, so she better not rub one out in the forest. The maiden said bet and hurried off. She quickly made her way to the ocean, the only place she truly felt comfortable. Come to think of it, that was the reason she had chosen Jeju Island as her place of escape. She'd hoped to find comfort amidst the crashing waves. But now, she wasn't sure she could even call her way of existing comfortable. It was a nightmare, corpses dropping around her like flies. Before she knew it, her voice choked up and tears began to fall. She finally realized she was alone. Worse, she had ignored her only friend in her final moments. That thought broke her, especially when she realized she hadn't even tried to help. Just as she was about to drown in her sob fest, a silhouette appeared, startling the shit out of her. The figure turned out to be a soldier, a brave warrior who'd come scavenging for supplies. He asked for food, and a few minutes later the two were chatting it up in the forest. After eating his fill, the warrior asked for more, not for himself, but for his starving comrades. At first, the vixen hesitated, fearing the hero's wrath if she got caught. But then, as if steeling her resolve, she agreed, choosing to support the revolution instead of watching passively. The soldier expressed his gratitude and made a vow. If she risked her life to bring them food, then they'd put their lives on the line to fight the hero. At the very least, they'd try to reclaim the island. As for what came after, he didn't care. He'd gladly take on that smoke. The maiden said bet and made a run for it. Since the surveillance drone wasn't focused on their location yet, now was the perfect time to move. She quickly returned with a basket of tangerines, a fire of hope and determination burning in her chest. Never again would she watch passively as those close to her died. Never again would she turn her eyes from the massacres committed by the so-called heroes. She would face them and play her part in the revolution. Viva la revolution, bitch. Unfortunately, her heroine starter pack arrived a little too late. When she reached the rendezvous point, she found the golem hero choking the shit out of the soldiers. The revolution had died before it could even begin. Shocked and horrified, she couldn't even react as a golem scooped her up. Pain brought her back to her senses, and she immediately questioned the hero. How had he known about their little Viva la revolution, bitch moment? The surveillance golem clearly hadn't been watching them. The hero looked at her like she was stupid. Did she really think he only had one golem? Hell no, he had hella drones. Drones galore. He canceled their invisibility mode, revealing the thousands of drones hovering in the air. Seeing the horrified look on the maiden's face, he burst out laughing. It was all a joke, a bait to give the rats hope before mercilessly crushing it. They never stood a chance. And if she thought it was cruel, inhuman, then she should become a hero and do something about it. Or maybe go back in time and comfort them when they were suffering. With that, he began his torture, squeezing the golem's hand just hard enough to crush her bones. Feeling her life draining from her body, the heroine decided to take the Sakura route. Full, useless trash. She cried out for someone, anyone, to save her. And lo and behold, someone actually answered. Stars twinkled in the sky before crashing down in a blinding explosion. A dust storm erupted, forcing the hero to stumble back. When the air finally cleared, a Chadly-looking figure stood before him. It was none other than Park motherfucking Jeongsu, back from the isekai, having clapped divine cheeks and finally returned to Earth. The hero of vengeance had arrived. An intense yet silent stare-down followed Jeongsu's arrival. All parties involved wondered what the hell was going on. But after a casual glance around and seeing the numerous crushed corpses, Jeongsu began to piece together the details. He turned to the vixen and, like a true alpha Chad, called her woman and demanded an explanation of the situation. Confused and slightly irritated at being referred to as woman, the vixen spaced out for a second, failing to answer the question. Feeling left out, the golem hero barked at the duo, demanding to know what the hell was happening. Who was this bastard, and why was he flirting with half-dead bitches in front of him? Confused and irritated for the second time that day, the vixen ignored the hero's accusatory bullshit and locked in on Jeongsu. Who was this bastard truly? He clearly wasn't part of Minsu's party, or else he'd already be infamous. Plus, he didn't seem to recognize the golem hero either, which meant he had to be new. Either way, this was her chance, and she wasn't keen on letting it slip by. Channeling her snitch no jutsu, she began snitching like crazy. She told Jeongsu about the golem hero, about how he was an underling of the sword hero, and all the atrocities he'd committed thus far. Winding up, she revealed that the hero had just massacred a squad of valiant soldiers and was now attempting to kill a dazzling maiden like herself. Fed up with her nonsense, the golem hero tightened his grip, forcing the vixen to squeal under the intensifying pressure. He warned her to watch her mouth, lest he kill her right then and there. But aside from that, what gave her the confidence to speak so brazenly before him? Did she think this was some casual meetup or something? Jeongsu chimed in, revealing that he'd already understood the situation. The golem hero was an asshole who was using his powers to massacre civilians, but most importantly, he was an underling of that wretched, bastard, maidenless son of a bitch Minsu. Overwhelming hatred and bloodlust radiated from him, and he asked the hero if he'd gotten it right. The golem hero was a little taken aback by his hostility, but soon regained his composure. So what if he had gotten it right? What would he do about it? Jeongsu glared at him and replied with one word: die. Acting on that declaration, he immediately entered a fighting stance. The golem hero responded in kind, and the two heroes officially began their battle. Taking the initiative, the golem hero opened with a dual short and long-ranged attack. He blasted Jeongsu with miniature death rays while deploying his hand golems to crush him in melee. Jeongsu didn't panic and responded accordingly. He spun his spear above him, creating a magical tornado that shredded everything around him. Then he pressed the attack, appearing before the hero in an instant. Without hesitation, he unleashed a crescent slash, chopping off the hero's arms with savagery. Intense pain streaked through the hero's body, and he instinctively screamed. He wanted to curse Jeongsu out, but a brutal kick to the jaw shut him right up. Having subdued the enemy, Jeongsu told him to confess. How well did he know the sword hero? The golem hero responded with an enraged shout, saying he didn't know what Jeongsu was talking about. To this, Jeongsu chopped off a leg, shutting the lying bastard up. With an intense gaze, he warned the hero not to fuck with him. Every time he lied or omitted details, he'd chop off a body part. Resuming his interrogation, he repeated his previous question. Did he know the sword hero, or nah? The golem hero replied that he did, the trauma from the pain still evident. He then glared at Jeongsu, refusing to answer his next question. Where was the sword hero right now? Without hesitation, Jeongsu chopped off another leg, reminding the goldfish-brained hero of the consequences of defiance. Then, as somber as ever, he repeated the question. Where the hell was that bastard Minsu? The golem hero broke into tears, begging to be spared. He'd do anything if it meant he could survive. Jeongsu straight up rejected the offer. First of all, saying anything was wild. He might have been tempted if he were a huzz, but unfortunately he wasn't. Second of all, the hero's death was inevitable. Since he'd given up on being human, it was unavoidable that he'd die here. However, if he answered all the questions honestly, Jeongsu would at least grant him a swift death. The golem hero smirked at the absurd counteroffer and chuckled coldly. He wasn't talking to Jeongsu but to his precious golems behind him. With those words, the hundreds of golems attacked, directing a portion of their forces toward the vixen as well. Surprised by the unexpected stray, the vixen stuttered in disbelief before getting absolutely swarmed. Meanwhile, the golem hero used that opportunity to escape. He deployed his hand golems, using their flight to carry him into the distance. As he did, he reflected on how things had ended up like this. Just like Minsu, he'd also been summoned into another world as a hero. The story followed the obvious tropes. He killed the princess and clapped the demon king. Oops, sorry, got that backwards. He clapped the princess and killed the demon king. Or maybe he clapped both. Who knows? Anyway, he quickly wrapped things up and returned to Earth. When he did, he was expecting a little gratitude, some kind of compensation for everything he'd done, especially since the demon king's next target would have been Earth. In a sense, saving that world was like saving Earth. However, just like Minsu, his reception wasn't all that great. He came home to a father who didn't want anything to do with him. All attempts to get help, even just a basic roof over his head, resulted in utter failure. The government and system failed him, forcing him to become homeless. As if that wasn't enough, he couldn't get work to support himself since he was technically still a minor. Most of the places he tried chased him out as soon as they discovered his age. Don't even talk about compensation for his labor. Those bastards stole that too. Worst of all, he was, as most have guessed already, without huz. A pitiful human indeed. Back in the present, the hero was continuing his escape when he heard a rumbling behind him. He tensely looked back only to see Jeongsu in a fighting stance, ready to attack. Without hesitation, Jeongsu coiled back, preparing a nasty spear throw. He delivered the golem hero's final verdict: death by thrusting. Pause. Picking up on the disastrous shift, the hero unleashed his trump card, the praying flower attack. It was a devastating blow, capable of leveling an entire city. Jeongsu responded in kind, activating his lightning ability. He coated his spear with it, boosting the output by a shit ton. Then, without mercy, he hurled it forward, splitting the sea and crashing headlong against the destructive laser beam. The spear broke through, cleaved the sky, and pierced right through the fleeing hero. It left a gaping hole in his chest, obliterating his heart and half his torso. When the dust settled, the only thing left was a mangled hero, thus marking the fall of Earth's first villain. The golem hero, destroyer of Jeju Island and countless innocents, had died a tragic virgin. Damn. Meanwhile, in another world, a celebration was underway. It was a festival honoring the hero who'd killed the Demon King and saved their world. The mages and citizens gathered, wishing the valiant hero happiness. They prayed that he'd find as much joy as he had brought to their world. Unexpectedly, the valiant hero turned out to be none other than the golem hero who had massacred thousands, and now lay dying tragically after losing to Jeongsu. Following the hero's death, all the golems under his control collapsed as well. The long-imprisoned civilians on the island finally regained their freedom and joyfully reunited with their families. A cheerful, bustling atmosphere spread across the island as they celebrated the fall of one of Earth's mightiest foes. Meanwhile, in the bushes nearby, the true hero, Jeongsu Park, watched all of this in envy. He envied the families lucky enough to reunite, since that was something he'd never have. A shadow of sorrow streaked across his face as he sighed regretfully at the thought. Lost in his mind, he barely picked up on the rustling bushes behind him. Acting quickly, he thrust his spear, stopping inches from the peeping Tom spying on him. Turns out the peep was the vixen, who, come to think of it, still hadn't been given a proper name. In fact, the neglect was so bad that the maiden herself introduced herself as the field girl. Cringing at the awkwardness, the vixen tried to change the subject and asked Jeongsu what he was doing hiding in the bushes. Was he practicing his stalker skills or something? Anyway, the civilians were curious about the hero who had saved them, so he should probably go say hi. Jeongsu flicked her a dismissive glance and declined immediately. He had no desire to be acknowledged for what he'd done. Besides, seeing another hero would just revive the civilians' fear instead. The whole thing sounded like a hustle, so why should he bother? Watching the slowly retreating Jeongsu, Field Girl flashed a gentle smile. He might say he didn't care, but it was obvious he was just a big, fluffy tsundere. Otherwise, he wouldn't have been so thoughtful and considerate toward the civilians' feelings. Jeongsu flinched at her words, knowing he'd been seen through. He didn't drop his facade, however, telling Field Girl to think whatever she wanted. Besides, they wouldn't be seeing each other again anyway. Realizing she was about to be written out of the story, the vixen immediately locked in. She first asked Jeongsu what his plans were. Did he intend to kill all the heroes? Jeongsu immediately confirmed. With a look of deep hatred in his eyes, he explained his plan. He would kill the sword hero and anyone foolish enough to side with him. The vixen followed up with another question. What was his reason? Revenge? Jeongsu confirmed again. Was there a better reason? He couldn't help but wonder if the vixen was slow or something. Otherwise, she wouldn't be asking such obvious questions. Ignoring the contempt in Jeongsu's eyes, the vixen did the most cliché thing ever. She asked to be brought along. Jeongsu looked at her like she was crazy. Was she really dense in the head, or just suicidal? Why would she ask something so ridiculous? Clearly self-aware, the vixen hurried to explain. She knew Jeongsu regarded her as dead weight, but that couldn't be further from the truth. He might say he intended to kill the heroes, but did he even know where they were? What abilities they had? And even if he did, how was he planning to get to them? He clearly didn't have a clue. That's where she came in. She would be his guide. She knew everything about the heroes and how to reach them. She could connect him with the human resistance, help him acquire supplies and resources, everything he'd need for his campaign. All she was asking for was a chance to be his guide. Moved by her resolve and her bullshit resourcefulness, Jeongsu asked about her reasons. Why was she willing to go that far? To endanger her life? The vixen replied that she was weak. Taking out a photograph of her family, she explained that she wanted revenge for their deaths, but was too weak to get it herself. Therefore, she was pinning her hopes on him, hoping she'd realize her revenge through him. A sorrowful silence followed her words, and the two settled into a somber quiet. Neither the civilians celebrating nearby, nor the heroes across the land, knew that a silent contract had just been signed in the depths of a random forest, a contract that would shape the fate of the world. Like a true Chad, Jeongsu issued the final warning. If she didn't mind being used and abandoned, then she could follow him. The vixen readily agreed. She loved that harsh, kinky shit, so why would she hesitate? Fast forward to a while later, and the duo were seen planning their next move. After careful consideration, Field Girl offered two potential targets: a nearby hero who was a pain in the ass to deal with, or a hero who was further away, but considerably less annoying. Which would Jeongsu prefer? Jeongsu answered without hesitation. He'd go for the one who'd die the quickest. Everything else was irrelevant. The vixen chuckled at the reply. She had a feeling he'd say something like that. Anyway, if that was his requirement, then their next target would be the Sea Dragon hero. Sharing more intel, she revealed the lore behind this particular bitch. She was responsible for annihilating entire fleets, making ocean travel a nightmare. Worse still, her ocean dragon was practically a nuclear bomb, capable of wiping out anything it came across. With those words, she couldn't help but think back to her encounter with the Sea Dragon hero. That wench had massacred thousands of refugees on their way to Jeju Island, and unfortunately, her entire family had been part of the unlucky group. Breaking out of her trance, tears welled up in her eyes, threatening to fall. She barely managed to pull herself together and face Jeongsu. The MC, in return, told her not to be afraid of the Sea Dragon hero. All she needed to know was that the bitch deserved death, and they'd kill her. But that aside, how were they supposed to get to her? If they were going to fight at sea, then they'd need a boat. Field Girl smirked mysteriously and told him to leave that to her. She knew exactly where to find the help they needed. Fast forward again, and the duo were now by the shore. In front of them stood a squad of Marines, and behind them a fully functional warship. Turns out they were also survivors of the Golem hero's tyranny. After he died, they had reclaimed their stolen ships, and here they were. With a solemn salute, they greeted Jeongsu, promising to be at his service. For the sake of their fallen comrades, they were willing to follow him anywhere, even into the depths of hell. Meanwhile, hundreds of kilometers away from Jeju Island, the scene shifted to a world of storms and lightning. Amidst the roaring waves and towering tsunamis, we were introduced to the target of Jeongsu's hunt, the Sea Dragon hero. Seemingly sensing a foreboding presence, the Sea Dragon rose from its slumber and peered into the distance. The hero noticed its unease and calmly comforted it. There was no reason to be worried. With melons as busty as hers, they had nothing to fear. Okay, she didn't say that, but goddamn. Shifting back to Jeju Island. On the coast where the land bled into the sea, a makeshift funeral was underway. Officiating the ceremony was a jacked-up Marine, lost in his thoughts as he smoked a cigarette. After brooding in silence for a while, he was joined by the captain, who noticed his solemn demeanor and sighed heavily. Suppressing the worry in his voice, the captain informed the Marine that they'd be leaving in 2 hours, so for his sake, and the crew's, he'd better lock in. The Marine ignored the warning and challenged him directly. Were they really doing the right thing? Should they be supporting Jeongsu? Sure, he had killed the Golem hero, but that wasn't enough to decide whether he was friend or foe. And even if he was a friend, What guarantee did they have that he could defeat the Sea Dragon hero, let alone the vastly superior sword hero, Minsu? The whole situation was a gamble, and he didn't know how to play it. He looked back at the graves of his fallen comrades and let the last of his doubt slip out. He wasn't sure if he wanted to go back to that hell, not on his own accord at least. The captain stared at the broken marine and replied with confidence. He didn't know whether Jeongsu was a friend or foe, and honestly, he didn't care. All he knew was that Jeongsu intended to kill the heroes, and that was enough for him. After losing 300 of his men, good men he had treated like sons, he no longer cared if he had to team up with the devil himself. As long as he could avenge his crew, he would be satisfied. When his own time came and he passed into the afterlife, he wanted to meet them with confidence, to tell them that although they had survived, they had found a way to avenge them, and that they had done everything possible to ensure their deaths weren't in vain. Tears welled in the marine's eyes as he listened to his captain's words. He vowed to follow him anywhere, even into hell itself. No matter where Jeongsu's allegiance lay, he would do his best to ignite the flames of freedom in his country. Fast forward an hour later, the warship was now on the move. In one of the cabins of the mighty fortress, a strategy meeting was underway. True to her position as strategist, the field girl promptly shared intel, a drawing of the hero and her sea dragon. Taken aback by the awful and straight-up garbage sketch, Jeongsu asked if she was serious. Even a kid's doodle wouldn't be that bad. Blushing, clearly embarrassed, the field girl told him not to worry about the art. The real value was the intel. What she truly wanted to convey was that, unlike the other heroes, the Sea Dragon hero was like two heroes in one. Both she and her dragon could be considered individual heroes. Frowning, Jeongsu asked if they could act independently as well. Vixen replied that although it was possible, it was unlikely. In all her appearances, the hero always fought in unison with the dragon, standing atop its head. The beast itself never moved unless ordered by her. As far as Vixen knew, they could consider them a unit, the hero as the brains and the dragon as the brawn. Jeongsu nodded in understanding and asked his next question. What were their attack patterns? Field Girl answered that they were simple. The dragon attacked with its breath and slammed with its body, purely offensive. All defense was left to the hero. Jeongsu frowned. Simple or not, the combination covered both offense and defense. Things wouldn't be as easy as he'd hoped. He was about to press further when a blaring alarm drew everyone's attention. Without hesitation, he grabbed his spear and sprinted outside. What he saw was chaos, a panicked crowd frantically rushing to their stations. Confused, he seized a soldier and demanded to know what was happening, why everyone was running around like headless chickens. The soldier stammered that they were under attack. Countless unidentified creatures were closing in, and it wouldn't be long before they were swarmed. Meanwhile, on the bridge, the captain was receiving a clearer analysis. The ship's radar had picked up a swarm of sea beasts, all charging straight toward them. Terrified, the radar operator shouted over the PA system, warning everyone to brace for impact. The gunners were granted free rein to fire at will. Receiving the order, they muttered, "Say less," and unleashed hell. A thunderous volley erupted, lighting up the night sky. After a deafening barrage, the chaos subsided, and the attackers were revealed for what they really were. To everyone's shock, they weren't even sea beasts, just fish. The crew was stunned, everyone except Jeongsu, who knew it was only the beginning. He roared at the crew to lock in, warning them that the true enemy was finally making her move. True to his words, a massive whirlpool tore open the ocean, and from it rose a colossal dragon. Its draconic roar split the heavens, deafening all who heard it. Atop the beast's head stood the hero herself, the busty Suashin. Without hesitation, she gave her command to her dragon, Dracaris. Oops, wrong story. Realizing shit was about to hit the fan, the captain ordered the ship to dodge, but Jeongsu cut him off, demanding the anchors be dropped instead. Though skeptical and terrified, the captain backed Jeongsu's call, commanding his crew to abide. This time, they were betting all their chips on him. The anchors plunged, rooting the ship in place. Before they could react, the dragon exhaled, spewing a torrent of searing flames toward them. Jeongsu didn't panic. He called forth his second spear, Ansil, the shield spear. Crimson light cracked through the night, and from it emerged an ominous, cross-shaped weapon. Gripping it tight, Jeongsu willed it to awaken. The weapon responded instantly, manifesting a star-shaped barrier before the ship. Still unconvinced of their safety, Jeongsu barked one last warning, urging everyone to get down lest they lose their heads in the clash. His words had barely left his lips when the dragon's breath struck, splitting the sea and shattering the skies. A thunderous explosion followed, lighting up the night, marking the epic beginning of the grand battle for freedom. The sea waves churned as the tremendous pressure from the clashing magic power blanketed the ocean, suppressing all those unfortunate enough to be caught in the battle. Meanwhile, the mortal soldiers were facing the worst of it. Not only could their weak, feeble bodies not handle the strain, but the mental pressure of knowing they were holding Jeongsu back weighed heavily on them. They knew for a fact that Jeongsu wasn't fighting back because he was protecting them, and that only made them feel even more useless. Fed up with being a bunch of useless sakuras, a soldier finally called out to the captain, urging him to give orders. At the very least, they had to do something to help Jeongsu. Hearing the shout, the captain finally snapped out of his daze. He quickly picked up the PA system and relayed his orders to the soldiers on deck. Everyone and their mothers were to prepare for battle. Their target was the hero and her sea dragon. Do everything possible to run interference and buy Jeongsu some wiggle room. The soldiers said bet and set to action. They quickly let it rip, launching a shit ton of missiles at the duo. The missiles corrected their trajectories mid-flight, arched over Jeongsu's barrier, and continued straight toward the sea dragon hero and her giant worm. Noticing the threat, the sea dragon hero immediately deployed defensive measures. First, she gave a quick tease at them boobies, because that bounciness alone was enough to ricochet the missiles back to the senders. Next, she took the more conventional route, setting up a magic barrier. Chanting a spell, she erected the Shield of Atlas, successfully blocking the incoming barrage. The move left the captain flabbergasted, as he hadn't expected her to act like that. Normally, the heroes just tanked missiles without a care, since they never did any real damage anyway. His goal hadn't been to harm her, but to distract her long enough to buy Jeongsu some breathing room. Nevertheless, he wouldn't be discouraged by just one failure. If it didn't work the first time, he'd just spin the block on her ass a couple more times until something eventually stuck. He gave his next order, instructing the soldiers to launch everything. Empty the magazines, dump every round, fire all the rockets, let that busty hero drown in explosions. Cough cough. Sorry, I meant very evil hero. The soldiers said bet and let them fly. They unleashed everything on her, blanketing the sky in fiery streaks of rockets. Meanwhile, Jeongsu immediately began to feel a change. The crushing pressure from the sea dragon gradually started to lessen. He soon realized it was due to the unique relationship between the hero and her dragon. Turns out the maiden was sharing her mana with the beast. Normally, she channeled all of it to the sea dragon, making its attacks tyrannical. However, with the bombardment from the ship forcing her to shield herself, she was now diverting a portion of her mana away, decreasing its output. This delighted Jeongsu, who inwardly praised the sailors. Seemed like they weren't that useless after all. He predicted that if things continued like this, the sea dragon hero would eventually run out of mana, and victory would be theirs. Feeling confident, Jeongsu stepped forward, aiming to press the advantage and speed up her demise. Unfortunately, things never go smoothly. After realizing Jeongsu had discovered her weakness, the sea dragon hero decisively changed tactics. Since blocking was putting her at a disadvantage, she'd make it so she didn't have to block at all. The simplest way? Destroy the ship. Grabbing her tossed trident, she switched her grip and entered a throwing stance. Without hesitation, she chanted the Spear of Atlas spell, buffing the weapon and yeeting it at the incoming missiles. The trident shredded through them like butter, setting off premature explosions, then traced a blazing arc through the sky, attempting to bypass Jeongsu's shield and strike the ship directly. But Jeongsu was one step ahead. He quickly expanded the surface of his magic barrier, successfully blocking the attack. Unfortunately, the sea dragon hero still had more up her sleeve. Deploying a divine fingering technique, she flicked her fingers upward, easily changing the trident's trajectory. Then, as if recalling her late-night jerking sesh, she unleashed a combo of finger techniques, going absolutely wild with them hands. The moves were so graceful, I was low-key tempted to see what that felt like. Meanwhile, the sailors on the ship weren't having such a great time. The trident tore through every obstacle, mowing down sailors left and right. The ship descended into chaos, racked by explosions with every sweep of the weapon. The sailors were powerless, massacred by the dozens. Finally, the last man standing ran toward the captain, hoping to shield him with his dying breath. Unfortunately, the trident was too fast, mowing him down before he could fulfill his noble goal. That left the captain all alone, with no one but himself to face the incoming strike. Blood and gore sputtered across the glass, marking his tragic death. Meanwhile, the trident maintained its tyrannical charge, hurtling straight toward Jeongsu. With Dragon's Breath coming from the front and the trident ambushing from behind, Jeongsu suddenly found himself in a perilous situation. He had no way to protect himself. The Sea Dragon hero grinned in victory, shouting for Jeongsu to just die already. The trident struck, and blood sputtered like a fountain. But contrary to what we expected, the mangled body wasn't Jeongsu's, it was a sailor's. The man had stepped in to block the attack for him. Clutching the trident with a death grip, he refused to let it move another inch toward Jeongsu. With a resolute tone, he roared at the Sea Dragon hero not to fuck with him. Did she really think she could kill Jeongsu with him watching? Nah. They'd already sacrificed too much to let her belittle them like that. He was a sailor, goddammit, and he'd be damned if he let her trample his honor or kill those he swore to protect. He thought back to his conversation with the captain, how they wanted to live the rest of their lives in service to their fallen brothers, how they wanted to ensure the lives saved by those sacrifices weren't lived in vain, and how they'd decided to give their own lives if necessary to keep the resistance alive. Those memories gave him the strength to hold on, to stop the trident in its tracks, to prevent it from reaching Jeongsu, the last hope of their rebellion. Though grueling, he managed to exhaust the trident's mana and rip control of it away from the Sea Dragon hero. Dying, he cracked a triumphant smile and uttered his last words, asking Jeongsu to continue the resistance and wield the trident well. Just like his brothers before him, he was sacrificing his life for the cause. He only hoped all their sacrifices would be worth it. With that, he breathed his last, going to reunite with his brothers in the afterlife. Jeongsu glanced down at him with a mixture of sadness and resolve. No words were necessary. He would definitely continue the struggle. At the very least, he'd make sure their deaths weren't in vain. With that thought, he grabbed hold of the trident and began the binding process. A cold, freezing aura seeped from it, marking its official debut. The glacial trident had been born. Meanwhile, in the afterlife, the sailor finally reunited with his fallen brothers. He apologized for keeping them waiting, but told them he was here now. Hugging them tightly, he embraced them with confidence, knowing he had kept his promise. He died honorably, contributing to the resistance. This time, he hadn't run away. Shifting back to the fight, we are given a bit more lore about the Sea Dragon hero. Just like all the heroes we've come to know thus far, she was also summoned to another world. In her case, it was to an aquatic world full and brimming with all sorts of marine life forms and kin. Of course, back in those days, she was still a young maiden and not the busty mommy we currently know. However, she still had a little bit of that maiden charm. In a pixelated form, of course. The world she was summoned to was called Atlas, the world of sea dragons, and for some reason Kratos was also there, just chilling, blending in with the masses and trying to fool people with his ridiculous disguise. Someone go tell this bastard he ain't Superman. Changing his iconic paint from red to blue isn't enough to fool anyone. Anyway, as the new hero, Sua Shin was introduced to the royalties of that world, and the one who summoned her. He turned out to be a jacked-up dude, flexing his abs and wielding a trident, the same trident Sua would later carry. Delighted, the King of Atlas asked her how she was doing. She certainly looked way more composed than she'd been a while earlier, back when she'd just been summoned to that world. So, was he to take it that she'd accepted her role as the hero and all the responsibilities it held? Sua replied with an uncertain, kinda. She was still getting accustomed to the whole idea. The fact that she had been summoned to a strange world and tasked with fighting and killing a demon king to make it back home was way too surreal for her. The king consoled her, encouraging her to take it one step at a time. Eventually, she'd come to accept it. But until then, he had something to give her. Something that would probably make the journey more bearable. To Sua's bewilderment, he handed her his trident. He then explained that it was a divine artifact passed down through time and many generations. It was crafted specifically for the chosen hero who would appear should the world need them. As for its abilities, it had many, but one would definitely interest a flatboard maiden like herself. Rumor had it that the trident would contribute to the bounciness and fullness of her plots. But that's information divined by the thirsty narrator, so she should take it with a grain of salt. Either way, it wouldn't hurt to wield the trident. Sua said bet and grabbed it. She soon realized that the trident was way heavier than she'd expected. If the seemingly light thing could be this deceivingly heavy, then maybe, just maybe, the flatboard to busty rumors weren't all that ludicrous. Oblivious to the hero's, or rather the narrator's, pervy thoughts, the king continued with his explanations. He explained that the trident held great significance in the kingdom, as it signified the acceptance of a hero. It also meant they'd support her wholeheartedly and put their trust and lives in her hands. Without a doubt, if she were to accept the trident, and by extension her role as their hero, it wouldn't be an exaggeration to say their life and death would be completely up to her. So, what did she think? Would she accept this noble role? Sua decisively nodded in agreement. She wasn't delusional enough to miss such an opportunity. In return, the king knelt before her, officially making his vows. He would be her humble servant, protector, and guardian. He would eliminate all those who stood in her way of destroying the Demon King. Then, as if it wasn't creepy at all that a grown dude was kissing a teenage girl, he grabbed her hand and gave it a smooch. Back to the fight with Jeongsu. Now that we understand the significance of the trident to the Sea Dragon hero, we can understand her ferocity at having it stolen from her. She barked at Jeongsu, demanding that he return the spear immediately. It wasn't something he could so casually taint with his unworthy hands. Saying so, she willed her sea dragon to attack, determined to reclaim the trident no matter what. Jung said, bet, that he'd return it right away. He'd throw it back to her, right through her skull, of course. Enraged, the sea dragon attacked immediately. It blasted a dragon's breath towards Jeongsu, evaporating the sea's surface with its might. Jeongsu didn't panic and faced it head-on. Instead of blocking with his shield, he decided to fight offense with offense. Deactivating his shield, he reared his hand back for a nasty throw. Then, without hesitation, he went on a short trot before yeeting the trident straight at the sea dragon hero. The trident shot off with a booming shockwave, freezing everything in its path. When it clashed with the dragon's breath, it only halted for a split second before freezing that as well and resuming its charge towards the hero. Panicked, Sua decided not to take any chances. She quickly called out to her dragon, asking it to give up on offense and focus everything on defense. The dragon glanced at her and promptly complied. It stopped using its dragon's breath and teamed up with Sua to fortify their defenses. Sua, in return, cast the strongest defensive spell in her arsenal, the Grand Shield of Atlas. It was a 5-layer shield, one so powerful not even the Demon Lord could breach it. Flashing a cocky grin, she told Jeongsu to go ahead and try it. She was certain he wouldn't be able to leave even a scratch on it. Before her words could settle, the trident froze the outer shield before obliterating it. It then moved on to the 4th shield and did the same. Then, as if replaying a scene from the hero's worst nightmare, the trident proceeded to freeze and obliterate the remaining shields, leaving Sua completely horrified. Finally, after exerting all her strength, and even using the bounciness of her plot, she managed to stop the trident's charge on the last shield. Exhausted and sweating from the strain, Sua wiped her brow and prepared for a counterattack. But to her shock, Jeongsu, the target of her soon-to-be vengeful dragon's breath, was nowhere to be found. Before she could piece together what the hell was happening, a cold voice called out, announcing that he was below her. Sua quickly shoved her obstructing bust to the side and peered downwards, straight towards Jeongsu, who was standing on ice and wielding a cross spear. It was at that moment she finally realized the intent behind his actions. Jeongsu hadn't thrown the trident to wound her. He'd done so to freeze the ocean surface, to make a path for himself to close the distance, and she'd completely fallen for his trap. Before she could react, Jeongsu lunged forward and swung his spear, sending a demonic crimson wave at Sua and the dragon. The attack was beyond brutal, cleaving straight through the last defensive shield, Sua, and the dragon hidden behind it. It proceeded to cleave the sky, split the sea, and all that exaggerated cultivation bullshit. Finally, the fate of Sua was revealed. Having been split in twain by the slash, she felt life drain from her body. She turned her tear-ridden eyes towards the sea dragon, telling it that she loved it. She loved it very much. Then, as if the pause had been lifted, the duo split in two, their bodies drifting apart in a flood of blood and gore. Meanwhile, we are thrust into another flashback, specifically one explaining the weird relationship between the hero and her sea dragon. After defeating the Demon King in a grueling battle, the hero, Sua, let out a tired sigh. After so much suffering and carnage, they'd finally done it. They'd finally taken down this cursed giant bird. The sea dragon, revealed to be the transformed form of the king, chimed in, congratulating her on her hard work. He then swooped her up, nestling her in a princess carry, which honestly, I still don't know how to feel about. I mean, isn't she still underage? Fucking PDF file. Anyway, the horny king ignored all the red flags and planted a wet one on her lips. Sua, in return, leaned closer, returning the kiss. Then, as if remembering something, tears inescapably welled up in her eyes. Confused, the king asked what was wrong. Why was she crying on such a joyous day? Sua didn't hide anything and shared her worries. Now that the Demon King was defeated, her return was approaching, and so was their time to say farewell. Although she was happy to return to her family, the idea of separating from him, her groomer, was saddening. The king, clearly keen on not letting his investment go to waste, told her he'd join her. He'd follow her to her world. Since he'd already fulfilled his duty as the King of Atlas and the Demon King had been defeated, he didn't see anything wrong with accompanying her to Earth to fulfill his role as her man and she as his hus. The citizens, however, were less than pleased about his sudden declaration. When they returned to the palace, they vehemently disagreed with the king's decision. They argued that it could be dangerous, pointing out that the world might be fundamentally different from their own. What would he do if the world turned out to be uninhabitable for a creature such as him? The king countered, telling them not to worry. If the hero could adapt to their world, what was preventing him from doing the same in hers? Besides, things were peaceful now, and a new heir had been chosen. What other reason did he have to stay? He would rather accompany Sua and live the rest of his life fulfilling his role as a partner. Thus, things were settled, and the departure date quickly arrived. Kneeling before the teleportation gate, the couple officially confirmed their relationship. They got engaged, completely ignoring the wrongness of it all. Come on, man. She's underage, and he's an old geezer with a kid older than her. How does any of this make sense? Anyway, I'll ignore it for now and continue with the story. Contrary to the blissful life they'd expected to live back on Earth, things couldn't have gone more wrong. Shortly after arriving, the king realized his sea dragon physique wasn't suitable for surviving there. It quickly began breaking down, with chunks of his organs and teeth falling out. Gradually, it became incredibly difficult to maintain his human form. Of course, he kept all this a secret from Sua, leaving her in the dark about his struggles. Whenever she asked, he would flash a reassuring smile and tell her he was fine, that there was nothing to worry about. And Sua, being head over heels in love, was too blinded by her feelings to realize otherwise. Finally, when things crossed the tipping point, the truth could no longer be hidden. When Sua got home from work one day, she was horrified to see the king and the condition he was in. The dude was a mess, with half of his body involuntarily morphing into his sea dragon form. Afraid that he could lose control and harm her, the king warned Sua not to approach. But, as expected from a maiden in love, Sua ignored that shit and ran to him. She hugged him tightly and told him everything would be okay. They'd find a way out together. She'd already saved up some money, enough for them to go to an uninhabited island. With no people around, he could freely transform into his sea dragon form and finally put an end to his suffering. They could live how they'd always wanted, together, forever. Though reluctant to separate her from the conveniences of modern society, friends, and family, the king eventually agreed. Returning the hug, he agreed to follow Sua's plan. They would run away together. Thus, the couple hugged it out, confirming their love and their plans moving forward. A couple days later, they officially embarked on their voyage. On a cruiser ship ferrying people from the mainland, the couple were seen blending in with the masses. Clearly worried, Sua urged the king to hold on. They were almost at their destination. Unfortunately, the king's condition had finally reached its breaking point. Before either one of them could react, a massive blast of mana exploded out, leveling everything in a kilometer radius. When the carnage subsided, the only thing left was a transformed king and fragments of destroyed ships and sea vessels. Obviously, the destruction made the news and attracted the aggro of the government. They quickly deemed her a threat, an enemy in the same camp as the slayer Minsu. What followed was predictable. The navy attacked, and she attacked back, leveling everything they sent her way. Soon the seas burned, and her status as a villain was firmly solidified. However, Sua wasn't particularly worried about this. So long as she could protect him, just as he'd protected her when she was in his world, she didn't care what the people called her. She would fight to protect him no matter what. Ending the flashback, we are taken back to the bloody battlefield. Maybe due to his rich vitality, the king, the sea dragon, managed to survive long enough to express his feelings. He loved her too. He loved her very much. With that, the couple died, having suffered a truly tragic fate. It's true what they say. Villains aren't born, they're made. Meanwhile, on another battlefield, we are reintroduced to the cause of it all, Kim motherfucking Minsu. As usual, he's brooding, probably contemplating which city to destroy next, instead of just getting some huzz and blowing off that murderous steam. Soon he is joined by another member of the villain group, a fox-eyed bastard who looks treacherous no matter how I look at it. Unfazed, Minsu flicks him an unbothered look, seemingly asking, "What do you want?" The bastard replied with a nonchalant tone, informing Minsu of the recent news. Both the Golem hero and the Sea Dragon hero had been taken down by Jeongsu, the new hero that just returned. Fanning the flames, he urged Minsu to do something about it. If he left things as they were, then the people would have hope again, and the eternal sadness he'd painstakingly cultivated in the country would inevitably fade. Hearing the words, Minsu slowly got up. This reaction was predicted by the sly bastard, who flashed a cunning smile in triumph. Opening his treacherous eyes a little wider, an act that made him seem even more suspicious, the bastard encouraged Minsu to get going. It was time to bring about the end once again. We take a break from the present carnage and dive into a parallel world, specifically, the world Jeongsu was summoned to. In the Mausoleum of Heroes, home to the various spears once held by past champions, a vast display of intricate weapons was on show. Likewise, in the same room, the guardian of the spears, attendant to the hero, was inquiring about the state of affairs in the mausoleum. A knight, likely the one in charge of protecting the hall, reported that the first spear, Burbash, previously summoned, had returned to its keep. At the same time, the fifth spear, Ansil, the demon spear of defense, had vanished without a trace, likely summoned by the hero. The guardian, a maiden dressed in full mage attire complete with a witch's hat, listened silently, her thoughts clearly conflicted. Noticing this, the knight asked if it was the hero's doing, and if so, did it mean what he thought it did? The mage confirmed, explaining that it had indeed begun, the revenge the spear hero had so deeply desired. With a resolute gaze, she ordered the knight to summon all the kingdom's skilled blacksmiths. They would mend and forge as many spears as possible. This time, it was their turn to support the hero, just as he had once supported them by eliminating the Demon King and bringing peace to their world. The knight said bet and hit her with a military salute. Why he saluted instead of kneeling like knights usually do, who knows, but hey, do you, my G? Left alone in the room, the guardian, who's low-key a baddie if you're a flat-as-justice kind of person, donned a somber expression. She thought back to her first impression of Jeongsu, the hero. Unlike the previous summoned heroes, a bunch of horny bastards who hadn't known the touch of a maiden, he was surprisingly intense. It wasn't a secret that he didn't care about their world or saving it from the Demon King. The only thing he cared about was getting stronger and pushing himself as far as possible. During his training, neglect, abuse, and self-harm were all too common, making the mage wonder if he was a masochist or something. Still, he had killer abs and a demon back like Yujiro Hanma, so she usually ignored it. One day, when the abuse surpassed even what she could tolerate, she finally spoke up, confronting Jeongsu and advising him to take it easy. But as expected of a vengeful ghost who'd lost everything, Jeongsu simply bitch-slapped that hand away and told her not to meddle. Training would end when he said it was over. Until then, she should stay out of his business and let him get stronger. He then hinted at his reason: revenge against Minsu. According to him, he was still too weak to face that monster. Any negligence would only lead to death, just as he had died before, weak and pitiful. Following that declaration, Jeongsu pushed himself even harder. He abused his body, completed his training, and fulfilled his duties as a hero, all without a single complaint. During a raid on a demon general's lair, Jeongsu once again went too far. He charged in, spear-swinging, clapping goblin cheeks with insane intensity. Blood and gore littered the cave, but he didn't stop, continuing to bless the goblins with his stick. Finally, the party had enough and told him to retreat. He was going too deep. But Jeongsu didn't listen. He kept polishing goblin cheeks, charging into their encirclement, thrusting and swinging with ridiculous proficiency. Predictably, things turned dangerous when goblins sneaked up behind him. Two closed in for a sneak attack. But unlike what everyone expected, Jeongsu reacted in time and cut them down, splattering the ground with their putrid blood and entrails. Consumed by the thrill of smashing goblin cheeks, he laid waste to the horde until his spear broke. Seizing the chance, the goblin lord, tired of watching his kin slaughtered, bashed the shit out of Jeongsu's head. He collapsed like a bitch. The goblins celebrated, thinking the tide had turned. But all Jeongsu saw was red. Instead of goblins, he saw Minsu's silhouette mocking him. Enraged, his fury exploded. He massacred the horde, chopping them like vegetables, painting the walls with gore. When done, he set his sights on the goblin lord. Like a psycho, he lunged, stabbing over and over, even after the lord's last breath. His party watched in horror as he continued. Obsessed, Jeongsu scoured the cave, killing every last goblin, even the little ones. When the carnage ended, only his ragged breathing remained. His body was drenched in blood and gore. Sitting to rest, trauma came creeping in. He hallucinated. His sister, bloody, begging him to save her. His mother's mangled corpse, asking him to protect his sister. His grandmother impaled on a beam, begging to be spared. Overwhelmed, Jeongsu roared, a deep guttural cry showing the depth of his pain. It was moments like this the mage realized. He wasn't a true hero, but a sinner, a vengeful ghost scraping by on revenge. Fast forward months into their campaign. Camping outdoors, the mage woke to find Jeongsu daydreaming. Concerned about the battered state of his body, she grabbed healing ointment and approached. With a tense voice, she asked if she could use it. Neglecting wounds would lead to complications. Jeongsu didn't reply, but his silence was compliance. She undid his bandages, revealing his Yujiro tier demon back, now covered in wounds. Gulping down her horny thoughts, she asked why he was doing this to himself. Why fight so relentlessly? Why abuse his body? His family wouldn't be happy seeing him like this. Jeongsu replied he had no one to return to. His family, his loved ones, all killed because he was weak. Confused, the mage asked why he was rushing to kill the Demon King then. If not to return home, then why? Jeongsu answered, revenge. There was someone else he had to kill. When she asked who and why his already terrifying strength wasn't enough, he admitted it. His enemy was absurdly strong. He needed overwhelming power. And when he got it, he'd torture his enemy for days, tear him apart, heal him, and repeat. He'd carve pieces of flesh, feed them to him, keep him alive, and when he begged for death, he'd deny it. Laughing maniacally, Jeongsu laid out his revenge plan. The more the mage listened, the more terrified she became. This bastard was truly insane. Jeongsu didn't notice her fear, rambling on about tormenting Minsu. Fast forward to the battle with the Demon King. It didn't go as expected. Instead of a desperate fight, Jeongsu blitzed the bastard. Defeated, the Demon King delivered the cliché last speech. You may have killed me, but I'll return in 100 years. Blah blah blah, the normal bullshit. Jeongsu didn't care. He pulled out a magical elixir and, to the party's shock, fed it to him. Fully healed, the Demon King laughed, thinking Jeongsu had betrayed humanity. He prepared to welcome him to the dark side, only for Jeongsu to tell him to shut up and fight again. What he wanted was strength, and the best way was to farm the Demon King. Crazy bastard. What followed was tragic, yet hilarious. The Demon King got clapped into oblivion, healed, and clapped again, over and over, until finally he broke, begging to die. The party recoiled in horror. At this point, they couldn't tell who the real villain was, the Demon King or Jeongsu. The mage clung to him, begging him to stop. He was strong enough. He didn't need to become the very monster he hated. Back in the present, the mage stayed true to her promise. Blacksmiths hammered away, forging spears for Jeongsu. Watching from the sidelines, she sighed, praying he'd stay human, even after revenge. Meanwhile, back on Earth, Jeongsu, the vengeful ghost, hallucinated Minsu laughing. Minsu mocked. What did he hope to achieve? Did he think people would praise him, cheer for him? He wasn't a savior, he was a nobody, destined to die by Minsu's hands. Unfazed, Jeongsu stabbed the hallucination and replied that he didn't care. Savior? Hero? He didn't care about titles. He'd be satisfied with just one: Minsu's murderer. Ignoring the ghostly apparition and the ache in his chest, Jeongsu made it back to the ship. Treading over the ice, he tossed his 2 spears onto the deck before jumping up and scaling the rail. Waiting there was Vixen, which was wild if you thought about it, since her real name still hadn't been mentioned. Isn't she a major character by now? Anyway, the maiden, dazed as ever, ogled Jeongsu, amazed he'd actually killed another hero. 2 for 2. Maybe with his help, Earth would finally know peace and the murderous heroes would be slain. She entertained that thought as she watched Jeongsu, full of MC aura, casually shake the ice from his body. Oblivious to Vixen's drifting thoughts, Jeongsu asked about the crew. Were there any survivors? Vixen shook her head. No one had made it through. She explained she'd checked every room and found only corpses, mangled, some with missing body parts. As of now, the only living beings on the ship were him and her. Saddened, Jeongsu sighed before brushing the topic aside. Unfortunate, but there was nothing he could do about it. Vixen then asked about their plans. Without the crew piloting the ship, how would they move it? Return to the coast? Or did he perhaps have some supernatural ability that could help? Conjure monodolphins or some shit. Jeongsu looked at her like she was crazy. What did she think heroes were? Magicians or something? Besides, as the guide, shouldn't she be the one offering solutions, e.g., a way to pilot the ship? Vixen, though aggrieved, swallowed her annoyance and replied that wasn't what she meant when she offered to be his guide. Besides, what did he take her for? Houdini? Did he expect her to pull sailing skills out of her ass? Disappointed, Jeongsu clicked in annoyance. He couldn't believe this. He'd thought she'd be competent from the way she'd insisted to tag along, but it turned out she was nothing but a waste of time. He walked past her, not hiding his disappointment in the least. Enraged, Vixen clapped back, shouting that she had her limits too. But that aside, shouldn't he at least give instructions before he left? What else did he need done? She'd definitely handle it. With a dark face, Jeongsu told her to take a break. She might not know this because she was useless and hadn't helped at all, but fighting used up a lot of energy. He was going to rest to recover. As for her, she should stay out of his hair and try to be as useful as possible, though he doubted it would be possible for someone so useless. Complete trash. Fuming, Vixen flicked him off and called him a bastard. Why did heroes have to be such assholes? But after thinking about it, her face softened. She too wanted to be helpful, but there was nothing she could do. She was only mortal after all. Fast forward to nighttime. Loud creaking sounds echoed through the ship. And before you ask, no. It wasn't the desired sound of cheek clapping, but Vixen rummaging through the ship for supplies. After being dissed by Jeongsu earlier, she took it upon herself to prove her usefulness. Hence the late-night search that sounded like she was getting her cakes baked. Rummaging through drawers, she had her sights set on locating the ship manual. She figured she could use it to solo sail the ship, which is absolutely crazy. But hey, do you boo-boo? While searching, she heard a sound that caught her attention. Confused, she checked it out because as far as she knew, only 2 people were alive on the ship, and Jeongsu had specifically said he would be turning in to rest. She carefully exited the office and peered toward the commotion. What she saw surprised her. Jeongsu, The same arrogant, insufferable bastard was carrying corpses, ferrying them to the deck for a proper burial. He even covered them with their navy flag, giving them an honorable military send-off. Amid the quiet and solemnity of the moment, Jeongsu offered his last wishes. He prayed that the sailors would find peace in the next life. He apologized for being unable to protect them or reunite them with their families, but he believed they'd be proud to hear of their courage and valor. For now, they should rest, knowing he'd do everything to avenge them and keep the people they fought to protect safe. Having said so, Jeongsu shed tears and wished the sailors better luck in their next life. Hopefully then, they'd know peace and happiness, unlike this one, fraught with sadness and sacrifice. Spying from the side, Vixen joined the prayer. She wished the sailors a happy life full of maidens and cheeks. And so, in a world where the line between life and death blurred, a young man and a hopeful maiden prayed, paying their respects to heroes who'd passed before them, heroes from whom they'd inherited a mantle. And as if destiny itself was smiling on them, an unexpected guest arrived, bringing the one thing they needed most, away off that ghost ship. Loud whooshing announced the arrival of a helicopter. Inside was a team of trained soldiers, geared for extraction. Choi Jung-wook, in charge of the operation, radioed base to report he'd found their target, the hero of revolt and a woman. From then on, he would commence top-secret operations, secure the hero of revolt. Calls of acknowledgement arrived from base, instructing him to proceed but to exercise caution. Don't let down his guard around the unfamiliar hero. Choi said bet and set to action, promising he'd be careful and handle the situation perfectly. Meanwhile, both Jeongsu and Vixen wondered what the hell was going on. Who were these people, and where had they come from? Had Vixen radioed for support? Vixen said she hadn't. The helicopter's arrival was as shocking to her as it was to him. However, she did worry they might be minions of the heroes. Predictably, when things went to shit and heroes had the advantage, some civilians sided with the heroes and became treacherous minions. Maybe this was them, rearing their ugly heads. Hearing this, Jeongsu immediately entered a fighting stance, wielding his spear and telling the minion bastards to come at him. Choi, watching from the helicopter, lifted his megaphone and shouted for Jeongsu to cool his titties. He wasn't there for war. On the contrary, he'd come on behalf of the reconstruction government to bring Jeongsu in. Saying so, he dropped a rope ladder and instructed Jeongsu to climb up for a chat. Jeongsu said cap and questioned Vixen about the group. Had she heard of them before? Vixen replied she hadn't run into them personally, but that rumors circulated. Apparently, they were an organization formed by the government and surviving soldiers, aimed at reclaiming their nation and, if possible, killing the murderous heroes. Since they were weak, their strategy often involved guerrilla warfare against the heroes, coupled with tremendous losses, basically sacrificing lives to buy time for future hope. Jeongsu listened and sighed in understanding. If that was true, it made sense they'd seek him out, a hero who could go toe-to-toe with the others. He quickly decided to board the chopper for a chat. After a cut, the duo were already aboard the helicopter, their gazes flicking around for traps. Sensing their unease, Choi calmly told them to take a seat. They'd head for their destination immediately. He turned to the pilot and instructed him to fly toward the base. The pilot gave a thumbs up and complied, turning the chopper east. For some reason during that time, Jeongsu decided to fire stray threats. He warned Choi not to try anything foolish. It would take him a couple of seconds to behead the gunman and take the chopper. Besides, their guns wouldn't work on him anyway, so he better not try anything funny. Simply put, he wasn't afraid of smoke. He didn't mind if Choi gave it to him right now. Pause. Shocked, Vixen gave him the "what are you doing" look. Did he want to kill her or something? Sure, guns wouldn't work on him, but they would definitely work on her, so he better stop with that bullshit. Choi said bet, and ripped off his bulletproof vest, revealing a bomb beneath. He asked Jeongsu if he could handle that as well. Was his skin really that thick? Even if he survived the blast, they were currently 600 meters above ground. Could he survive the fall? And say he was blessed by Lady Luck herself with the Maiden of Providence personally giving him the cheeks. Below them was a vast sea. Was he confident he could survive all that and still swim to safety? If so, he wouldn't mind saluting him right now and calling him Oni-chan. Jeongsu heard the teasing remarks, mostly from the narrator, and immediately fumed. His aura darkened, pressing down on the space. Realizing this, Vixen coaxed him to calm down. These soldier bastards had clearly come prepared, so fighting wasn't wise. She advised he cool off and comply for now. Clearly feeling himself, Choi told them to shut up. He was in charge now, so the duo better stay quiet and do as he said. Thus, the journey continued, the atmosphere in the chopper growing more tense. After an hour, Vixen couldn't help but let her mind wander. Were these cocky bastards really from the government? Sure, they had the gear and professional dress, but were such people really this foolish? Who would willingly antagonize a hero, especially when heroes wielded bizarre abilities? What a bunch of reckless fools. Seemingly fed up, Jeongsu asked where they were going. Choi, still deluding himself with his false sense of control, told him to pipe down. He would be the one asking questions. But first, there was one thing to do. He signaled his men to tie the duo up. Alarmed, Vixen shouted for them to hold up. Why were they being treated like this? Didn't they know Jeongsu had already killed 2 heroes? Surely that proved he was on their side, worthy of better treatment. The soldiers ignored that nonsense and pointed guns at her, telling her to shut up and sit down lest they paint the walls with her brain matter. As for the "he's with us" bullshit, they didn't want to hear it. They knew nothing about him, his goals, reasons, nothing. There was no us in this scenario, only heroes and the rest of them. As for destination, he didn't need to concern himself. He was being transported, and they would arrive when they arrived. Fuming, Jeongsu barely held back from punching Choi. If the situation allowed it, he would have definitely tenderized those cheeks. Ignoring Jeongsu's death glare, Choi instructed his men to bind and blindfold him. Their destination had to be kept secret at all costs. And so the journey continued, the helicopter flying above a ruined city. After several minutes of maneuvering, they finally landed on a helipad, the destination. Alighting, Choi instructed the soldiers to escort the duo inside. The soldiers complied and carried out the task swiftly. Hanging back, Choi ignored the other soldiers' congratulatory remarks and locked in. He told them the game was just beginning, so any praise was unnecessary. For now, they should head to the interrogation room. He would join them after smoking a bit of that green. Distancing himself, he lit a cigarette and contemplated his next move. Would this be clever, or would they fall for the sword hero's ploy? Only time would tell. He hoped it was the former. They desperately needed a win. Unaware, he was being watched by a surveillance drone. The drone was linked to a secret base with the entire city under full surveillance. Responsible for this massive breach of privacy and downright peeping Tom behavior was a mechanical construct of human nature. In simpler terms, a freaking cyborg. Shifting scenes, we switch back to Jeongsu and the soldiers. After being led into the building, the group descended a flight of stairs, making their way to an interrogation room. The paths they took were eerily silent, purposefully deserted, as if the other occupants didn't want to run into the menacing hero. After walking for a while and feeling his patience run thin, Jeongsu began contemplating his escape. For a hero like him, the handcuffs and ropes weren't a big deal. He'd only need a second to free himself. Moreover, judging by the echo in the area, the path they were taking was narrow, so at most, he'd have to face 4 or 5 soldiers once he broke free. Such feeble mortals wouldn't take him 3 seconds to annihilate. Growing increasingly frustrated, and realizing there was truly nothing capable of stopping him, Jeongsu seriously considered escaping. He stopped, making the soldiers flinch with anxiety. They aimed their rifles, nerves taut as they asked Jeongsu what he was doing. Why wasn't he moving? Jeongsu, as menacing as ever, answered briskly. Why should he? He'd only accommodated their foolish demands because falling out with them while still in the air was reckless, fraught with unpredictable consequences. But now that he was already on the ground, why should he continue accommodating them? Did they think he was a fool? Or worse, a bitch? The soldiers' scalps tingled at the threat, heightening their fear even more. They aimed their rifles tighter at Jeongsu, warning him not to move. If he had something to say, he could say it in the interrogation room. Meanwhile, they were already scared shitless, their fingers involuntarily pressing harder on the triggers. Any sudden moves by Jeongsu, and they'd light his shit up. Realizing they were at an impasse and neither party would back down, Jeongsu prepared to take action. He flexed his arms, making the handcuffs creak with strain. A little push was all he'd need to drop all pretenses, free himself, and possibly go on a cheek-clapping campaign. However, before he could, a hand suddenly grabbed his shoulder, urging him to calm down. The intervening vixen begged him not to be hasty. He shouldn't take any drastic measures and should instead think about it from the soldiers' perspective. They were just scared. As normal, maidenless mortals whose world had collapsed, who hadn't enjoyed the touch of a maiden in a long time, and were now forced to escort a dangerous superhuman, how could they not be scared? Regardless, she doubted they harbored any ill intentions, so Jeongsu should be more understanding. Besides, they were with the Reconstruction government, which meant their goals should align. They both hated and wanted to annihilate the heroes, so they were technically on the same side. Jeongsu listened silently, refraining from commenting for now. But the fact that cheeks weren't already getting baked meant he was taking the vixen's words to heart. Realizing this, the vixen spoke with even more confidence. She told Jeongsu this was the perfect opportunity. They could utilize the government and its resources to support their campaign, not only making things easier for them, but also significantly reducing the danger. But before doing so, they had to make the government trust them, hence, no fighting. Jeongsu thought about it, then lowered his arm. He confidently walked ahead of the group, resuming his trek to the interrogation room. Since he could escape whenever he wanted, and the soldiers were too weak to stop him, why wouldn't he indulge them? He could simply flee if things didn't go his way. The soldiers, puzzled by his sudden change in attitude, nevertheless were just glad a fight hadn't broken out. They collectively heaved a sigh of relief, continuing their advance toward the interrogation room. After some time, and after separating the pair, the soldiers ushered the vixen into a private interrogation room. The room was eerily dark, with a foreboding pressure lingering in the air. Ignoring this, they sat her down and calmly exited. Left alone in the gloom, the vixen didn't have to wait long before Choi joined her. He didn't mince words and directly got down to business, asking what kind of person Jeongsu was. They already knew she wasn't a hero, so why did she, a mortal, choose to ally with one, let alone the hero of revolt? Taken aback, the vixen marveled at the absurd nickname. Hero of revolt? Wasn't that a bit too flashy? What was next? Cheek synthesizer Jeongsu, with all the cheeks he'd been clapping lately? Anyway, they didn't have to ask. She was sticking with Jeongsu because he was different. Noticing Choi's confusion, the vixen explained further. She shared that Jeongsu harbored a deep hatred for Minsu, the sword hero. His only goal, as far as she could tell, was to kill Minsu and any other hero who chose to stand with him. He had no other motives, as if he would simply disappear once the task was done. If that wasn't different, she didn't know what was. Listening, Choi admitted that it made sense. Jeongsu was indeed different. As for why he harbored such deep hatred for Minsu and only started fighting back just now, the answer was simple. He'd most likely died by Minsu's hand, fallen into the other world, and only now returned. That would explain his hero status and zero tolerance for anything involving Minsu. However, despite their seemingly aligned goals, it still wasn't enough to trust him fully. Pressing further, Choi pushed the vixen for more information. Sure, Jeongsu was different, but what did that have to do with her? Why was she accompanying him? Not to mention, why did he allow it? Suppressing a cough from Choi's chain smoking, the vixen replied that she'd volunteered. He'd needed a guide, so things just kinda worked out. Besides, as someone who'd lost her family to heroes, and learning Jeongsu was out to kill them, she asked to tag along to be part of his revenge. In a way, it was like she was avenging them herself. However, things hadn't gone as smoothly as she expected. Instead of tagging along and helping him, she'd become more and more of a burden, a useless Sakura of late. Ignoring her pity party, Choi told her that her words made sense and aligned with the Reconstruction government's goals. This delighted the vixen, who shot up in joy, already imagining a bright future. With the government's help, manpower, and resources, it would be significantly easier to eliminate the heroes and bring the world back to normal. She could already picture it, and the thought brought a smile to her face. However, her naive optimism was bound to be shattered. Choi informed her they would not be releasing Jeongsu, nor did they have any plans to ally with him against Minsu. They would not take any action unless Jeongsu, the hero of revolt, proved to them that he could be trusted and was firmly within their control. Puzzled, the vixen looked at him like he was crazy. What type of bullshit was this cocky bastard spouting? Control Jeongsu? What gave him the idea he could even attempt something like that? And why would Jeongsu allow it in the first place? Seemingly sensing her doubts, Choi flipped the question back to her. Why shouldn't he? Did she truly trust Jeongsu? Did she know what he was thinking right now? How he was feeling? Say they helped him fight against Minsu. Could she guarantee Jeongsu would win? That he was stronger? And even if he was, and he ended up killing Minsu, what guarantee did they have that he wouldn't become the next tyrant? That he'd calmly disappear into the shadows after his task was done? The truth was, she didn't know, and neither did they. That's why the government wouldn't gamble on such an unpredictable variable. They didn't have the luxury of mistakes and starting all over again. It was better to either control him, imprison him, or use the chance, while he was still in their custody, to kill him and avoid future trouble. The vixen paled at his words. These bastards, had they gone crazy? What kind of twisted logic was that? But if they did decide to go through with it, didn't that mean by stopping Jeongsu back then, she'd unknowingly damned him? Fuck. Truly a Sakura. Useless trash. Fast forward to 3 days later. In the interrogation room holding Jeongsu, the hero was still bound, looking haggard and visibly dehydrated. Though annoyed, he barely kept his calm by recalling his conversation with the vixen. The soldiers were just scared, so he should make them trust him. However, wasn't this taking things too far? For 3 days they hadn't fed him or given him water. Wasn't this basically trying to kill him? Luckily he was awakened, so this much couldn't kill him, but it was still annoying. As he debated his next move, whether to just crash out and leave, the entire building suddenly shook. The rumbles grew more frequent and louder, finally drawing his attention. Following the rumbling came gunshots, hinting at a serious battle outside. Jeongsu perked up his ears to glean more, but the odd events in his interrogation room forced him to lock in. To his surprise, his hands were uncuffed and his blindfold removed. Just as he was about to ask what was going on, he saw an unexpected sight before him. The vixen, accompanied by an unidentified man. The man, clearly a hero, sized up Jeongsu and greeted him casually. So, he's the so-called hero of revolt? It was nice to meet him. Jeongsu stared back but didn't answer. Who was this bastard? And did he really have to clap hero cheeks the moment he got released? What irony. The hero seemed to guess his thoughts and introduced himself. He clarified that he wasn't there for smoke, but had come to rescue him. He was the hero of Iron Arm, and if Jeongsu wished, they could be allies from then on. Confused, Jeongsu flicked his gaze toward the vixen. What the hell was this shit? If he remembered correctly, wasn't the Iron Arm hero part of Minsu's team? Why would the vixen bring him here? The vixen guiltily turned her head away and explained that she had no choice. This was the only way she could think of to get them out safely. The Reconstruction government had betrayed them, and never had any plans of working with them. In fact, they'd always intended to kill them. So when the Iron Arm hero appeared, she figured it was better to ally with him than suffer the government's betrayal. The Iron Arm hero chimed in, explaining that he wasn't all that bad. Actually, most of the heroes weren't bad. They just got caught up in some bullshit. As for the government, those bastards had never been reliable to begin with, let alone now. It wasn't a surprise that they wanted to get rid of him, a variable they couldn't contain or control. Still feeling Jeongsu's burning gaze, the vixen apologized. She admitted she'd miscalculated this time. Convincing him to trust the government had been the wrong move, but at least they now had a way out. If they allied with the Iron Arm hero, they could safely leave this place and continue their campaign. Wouldn't that be great? Jeongsu didn't answer. Instead, he silently flexed his muscles. With overwhelming superhuman strength, he easily broke free from his restraints. Without missing a beat, he stretched out his hand and summoned his trusty companion, his spear. The weapon tore through the building, arriving in Jeongsu's hand in an instant. Without hesitation, he aimed the tip at the Iron Arm hero and warned him to shut his mouth. What ally? What work together? He'd better shut his mouth hole before Jeongsu killed him for his bullshit. He had no intention of allying with him. The vixen intervened, pleading with him to hold on. There was no need to fight. The hero was just there to help them. Jeongsu, already tired of this useless Sakura bitch, yeeted her by the mouth, lifting her into the air. With a tone that didn't bother concealing his disappointment, he asked if that was how deep her vengeance went. The second her life was in danger, she'd abandon her goals and ally with her enemies? He'd always thought she had the same drive, the same objective as him, but he guessed he was wrong. He couldn't trust her ass at all. The Iron Arm hero, sensing the rising tension, stepped in to mediate. He told Jeongsu he was wrong about them. Not all heroes were bad. Like he'd said, some were just unlucky and got caught in the bullshit. He wasn't like Minsu at all, even if he worked with him. Jeongsu, however, didn't want to hear that shit. He told the Iron Arm hero to shut up. He didn't want excuses from a beast who gave up on being human. Heroes, especially those who joined Minsu, had crossed the line, and he had no intention of letting them live, let alone joining them. The Iron Arm hero should prepare himself, because shit was about to get active. Saying so, he dropped the vixen, entered a fighting stance, and prepared for battle. Maybe because he was still fond of her, he advised the vixen to leave before she got caught up in the fight and died tragically. However, contrary to his expectations, instead of leaving, the vixen turned to the door and shouted loudly. Wasn't that enough already? Did they really want to see a fight break out before stepping in? They'd better stop fucking around. Confused, Jeongsu turned to the door. What the hell was she rambling about? Had she finally gone senile? To his shock, Choi swaggered into the room and addressed him directly. He'd passed. To understand what was going on, we flash back to 3 days earlier. After revealing to the vixen what the government intended to do to Jeongsu, Choi ignored her pale face and mocked her slightly. Did she really think it was that easy to get the government's support? Just have a common enemy and they'd suddenly drop everything and trust them? Nah, it didn't work like that. The government only took gambles they could control or, at the very least, contain. They wouldn't risk it with an uncontrollable variable like Jeongsu. Well, at least that's what the geezers at the top thought. Those old fogies clinging to power wouldn't make such a risky move. He, on the other hand, was inclined to give it a shot, to test just how feasible a cooperation with a hero could be. Since Jeongsu had already proved himself by killing not one but 2 heroes, Choi believed it was a worthwhile gamble to see just how far they could go. Who knew? Maybe this would be the fire to light the asses of the top brass, to remind them that a comfortable life inside a cage couldn't compare to fighting and dying for freedom. He said this while staring at a wall, which just so happened to be a one-way mirror concealing the top brass behind it. Hearing Choi's words, the leaders mulled it over. After much consideration, they decided to give it a shot. Though eccentric, they knew Choi had always acted with humanity's best interests at heart. Why not trust him again this time? Receiving the green light, Choi turned to the vixen. He'd just thought of a brilliant idea, one capable of revealing Jeongsu's true objective and nature. So, would the vixen be up for a play? One guaranteed to expose her so-called hero? Ending the flashback, we return to Jeongsu's interrogation room. Noticing his confusion, the vixen explained that it had all been an act, a test to confirm whether he was truly what he claimed. A hero killer. A way to prove whether they could trust him. Choi chimed in, explaining that the man before him wasn't even the real Iron Arm hero, just a lookalike they'd hired to play the part. As for everything else, it was, as the vixen had said, an act. Incredulous, Jeongsu looked at him like he was crazy. What type of bullshit test was this? What would have happened if he'd failed and agreed to join the Iron Arm hero instead? Choi answered directly. He would have died. Below his seat was enough explosives to level a whole building, let alone light his pale ass up. And even if he'd somehow survived that, a team of death soldiers was waiting outside to launch a suicide mission. They were tasked with firing everything they had until either he died or the whole squad was wiped out. If even that failed, they'd resort to the final contingency. Detonate the several tons of bombs hidden below him to buy time for mass evacuation. Sure, maybe that much firepower wouldn't kill him, but trading a building and a few loyal soldiers' lives for the future of the Reconstruction government and its citizens was more than worth it. Jeongsu listened to the meticulous plans and nodded in approval. Though ruthless, even to the point of using their own men as cannon fodder, he couldn't deny their resolve was commendable. Only such lunatics could help him in his vengeance and possibly earn a fraction of his trust. He turned to Choi, informing him that he was in. Although he didn't appreciate being toyed with, he had at least confirmed their goals aligned, and that alone was enough for him to ally with them. Choi said bet. They felt the same. In exchange for the trust he'd shown, the reconstruction government would do everything in its power to support and aid him in his grand campaign. Thus, a formal cooperation was established, one destined to reshape the fate of the world. Fast forward to some time later, and the trio were in a secret elevator, heading for the lowest level of the base. After descending for a while, the elevator finally crossed the 12th basement floor, and unlike the duo's expectations, the scenery wasn't the same bland elevator walls, but a huge mega-sized cityscape instead. These bastards had actually built a whole underground city. How truly audacious. Taken aback, the vixens stared at the cityscape in wonder. How had they managed this? Choi explained that they'd remodeled a supersized underground air raid bunker from the Cold War into the current super shelter. No news of it was ever released because the heroes' information system was too advanced. However, now that they were already there, it wouldn't hurt to know the shelter housed approximately 50,000 people and formed the foundation of the reconstruction government. As for Jeongsu, it was best he knew that rumors about him had been circulating. Everyone was eager to meet the hero killer. This was quickly confirmed by the gathering crowd and thousands chanting his name. Choi turned to him and advised sincerely. He might have his reasons, his own vendetta against the heroes. But the citizens had put their trust in him, and he hoped Jeongsu wouldn't betray that trust. If he had even a shred of humanity left, he hoped he'd use it to protect the people. Arriving on the ground floor, the trio calmly made their way through the crowd. They hadn't gone far when Jeongsu noticed a peculiar sight. A kid, innocent as ever, nervously walking up to him with a bouquet of flowers in her arms. Under the crowd's cheerful applause, she handed the flowers to Jeongsu and shyly ran back to her parents. Still taken aback, Jeongsu couldn't help but see a shadow of his sister in her. Protect? Did he even have anything left to protect anymore? The thought crossed his mind, and his heart sank.